Welcome everybody again. Today we're going to be talking about, or you're going to be learning about, the first commandment. The first commandment as presented in the book of the law. And when we talk about the book of the law, we're talking about this book that I'm showing now on the screen, and not the first 5 books that are found in the so-called Bible. It's a specific book called the Book of the Law. If you haven't watched the presentation we had last week, I think it was presentation number 57, where we talked about the Book of the Law. I'd recommend that you watch that first before you come to watch this first presentation on the first commandment. So what are we talking about with regard to the first commandment? We're talking about the commandments that were given by the voice of the Most High. The voice of the Most High. These commandments were given by the voice of the Most High in Mount Sinai to Moses and to all of Israel. For though Moses and the elders of Israel or Israel only went into the mountain, it was only Moses and the elders who went up into the mountain. Even if it was just only them, and only Moses alone received the tablets of the law, all of Israel heard the voice of the Most High. So the Most High spoke and gave them the commandments, and they heard those commandments. These commandments were also written on the 2 tablets of stone. They were written by the finger of the Most High. And you can find the reference of that in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 10. Chapter 9, verse 10, verse 11. And in these other scriptures mentioned over here, like in Exodus and Deuteronomy chapter 9. Also, you can find these commandments in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 1 to 5. We'll see a bit of that later on. Later on, these tablets, they call them tables in this book, were placed in the Ark of the Covenant. And they have been kept within the tabernacles, and they were kept within, that Ark of the Covenant was kept within the tabernacle and the temple until the Babylonian captivity. So that's a little bit of background on when these commandments were given and how they were given. Let's get right into it, into this first commandment. So this is that first commandment. Let's listen to it.
Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy might, and with all thy strength. Thou shalt adore him, and serve him, and obey him. Thou shalt have no other gods before thee. Thou shalt not make unto thee any image or likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the waters of the earth, to bow thyself unto it, or to worship it. Thou shalt not bow down thyself unto, nor adore anything that thine eye beholdeth, or thy imagination conceiveth of, but the Lord thy God only. For the Lord thy God is a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, from generation to generation, even upon all that hate him, and showing a multitude of mercies unto them that keep his commandments.
So that is the entire first commandment according to the book of the law. Notice it is not several commandments, it is one commandment. All right, let me skip forward.
Thou shalt.
All right. So the first sentence that I have highlighted here, which says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy might and with all thy strength. This sentence summarizes the terms and conditions of this relationship between you and the Most High, Tatanzambi. Why do I say it summarizes the terms and the conditions of this relationship between you and the Most High? I say that because it tells us that you shall love Tatanzambi. Those are the terms. You shall love Tatanzambe. So this is a relationship between, or this is a covenant between you and the Most High. And how you will relate to the Most High is by loving him. How are you going to love him? You're going to love him with your whole self, wholeheartedly. But this relationship is founded on love. So you are to love the Most High only. Okay, that is explained in the rest of the text after what I have highlighted here in red. If you may remember, last week we also talked about another scripture, which is in Matthew chapter 22. And in verse 36 of Matthew 22, a lawyer asked Messiah Yesu, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And in verse 37, Messiah said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. In verse 38, Messiah said, This is the first and great commandment. So Messiah was quoting this first part here. He did not quote the entire thing, but he quoted the headline or the summary of it. So if Messiah was quoting this first part as a summary of the entire commandment, and he said this is the first and great commandment, I believe Messiah knew the scriptures and he was quoting them correctly. Now, some of you may have noticed this when you are reading this. When you compare it to what is in Matthew chapter 22, you'll notice that Messiah here uses the word, he says, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, which is the same. And then here he says, and with all thy, where it says might, Messiah says soul. And where it says strength, Messiah says mind. I think that's just a translation or transliteration issue. The main point here is that you're loving the Most High wholeheartedly. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5 is where you'll also find this statement, but in a slightly different version. It's pretty much the same statement, but it's not as part of the commandments. It's just being referenced in a different episode. And the statement there reads, and you shall love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might. So again, the two words soul and might being used to mean something. Sometimes it's the word soul comes first and then might comes second instead of strength. But the idea is that you're loving the Most High wholeheartedly. That is the main point. So key thing here is this is the first commandment and it is the greatest commandment. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this commandment, since now we know that the terms are loving and the parties are who. Let's see who the parties are in this relationship. The first party is you, or is Isolele, the children of Jacob who were leaving Egypt. They identified here 15 times. I have underlined every time you are being referenced. You shall love the Lord thy God. First and foremost, I want you to understand that this commandment is about you as an individual. Yes, they were the nation of Isolele as a nation, but the Most High was speaking to them as you. This is what he said, you shall love the Lord thy God. When he says thy, that's like your God. He's saying your God. So he's talking about you again. And he's telling you to love him with thy heart. Thy heart means your heart. So again, it's you, your might, your strength. You shall adore him. You serve him and obey him. You shall have no other. You shall not. So now he goes about telling you what you shall do and what you shall not do. Okay. I couldn't help remember that, we have a phrase today in modern times, a contemporary phrase that is used to say something is set in stone or it's not set in stone. If I say, kids, go and clean up your room, and I say that's set in stone, it's like we can't change that. It's already engraved in stone. I think that phrase came from this commandment, because the Most High engraved on those stone tablets with his finger, and what he engraved could not be changed. So it was set in stone. So the first part about this commandment is that it's about you. Don't bow yourself. Do not bow yourself unto anything above or anything your eye beholds or anything that you make that is in the image or likeness of something above, below, or beneath. We keep seeing you, thy, that's your, being repeated 15 times. Now, the next entity in this commandment, of course, is the Most High, 12 times. The Most High, remember, is the one speaking, because he spoke to the children of Israel and he told them who he is. He says, you shall love the Lord, that's him, your God, okay? You'll adore him, serve him, obey him, okay? And he repeats here about, don't worship or do anything that you imagine or that your eye beholds, but instead love the Lord, thy God only. Lord God, he says he's a jealous God. He's telling you more about himself. And he says, those that he will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children from generation to generation, even upon all that hate him. So he's identifying who to visit based on their relationship with him, himself. Okay. And he will show mercy, a multitude of mercies, to those that, again, keep his commandments. He's restricting this to himself, not to any other person, deity, or entity. He is claiming to be the one that receives or that is part of this covenant. It's between you, Isolele, and him. And remember, these events were occurring at Mount Sinai. We can look at the scriptures in Deuteronomy, and they will show us clearly that the Most High, not any other deity, but the Most High, Tatanzambi, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, identifies himself. Let's take a look. This is Deuteronomy chapter 5. This is where you find this commandment all spelled out. It says here at the top, and Moses called all Isolele and said to them, hear, O Isolele, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your ears this day, that you may learn them and keep and do them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Please mute yourselves. If anybody is not muted, please mute yourself. So the Lord made not this covenant with our fathers. This was not a covenant with Abraham or Isaac or Jacob, no, but with us, solely, even us who are all of us here alive this day, the ones who were there. He made that covenant with them, not their forefathers. The Lord talked with you face to face in the mount out of the midst of the fire. Again, remember I said he spoke. And Moses says, I stood between the Lord and you at that time. to show you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid by reason of the fire, and went not up into the mount, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. So the Most High is clearly identifying himself to the nation of Isolele and telling them, I am the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. He's not letting anybody else come and try to take that credit for it. And then now he goes on to give them the commandments. Here in the scriptures in Deuteronomy, we see it starts off by, it says, thou shalt have none other gods before me. It's not referencing this first commandment like we have it in the book of the law. But this is to tell you that this covenant, the Most High established it. He identified himself, and he identified it as a covenant between him and the nation of Isolele, not their forefathers. And the nation of Isolele is us today. That is why we keep saying it's important that the nation of Isolele keeps the commandments, because they were told to do so from generation to generation. They were not told that this was done away with. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper into this first commandment. Okay, we're going to dissect it a little bit more deeper than that. So it says, thou shalt love. So the terms of and the conditions are based on a foundation of love. Okay, now how do you love him? Tells you, you shall adore him, you shall serve him, you shall obey him, you shall have no other gods before him. You shall not make unto yourself any image or likeness of anything above, beneath, or in the waters of the earth. Remember when people, if you read about, for example, Egypt, ancient Egypt, you'll read about the sun god. They called him Ra. If you read the testament of Abraham, you see that Abraham began by worshiping the sun, then he even worshiped the moon, then he came to his senses and he realized, no, there is a higher being than those lights in the sky. So the Most High was reminding us, do not make anything like the sun or an image of it, or the moon. Do not make an image of anything here on the earth. There are some people who've made idols. Some of them look like goats, and they worship them and they bow down to them. What are we talking about in terms of idols here? Walk into several Christian churches today. You'll find statues, not statutes. You'll find statues of Messiah or Yesu or Jesus. You find people kneeling, bowing to them, especially during the time of Lent. It's common practice in some denominations that they go and they bow down and they kneel at every station of what they call the stations of the cross, 14 of them, I think. This is what the Most High said not to do. You're not even supposed to have those images or likenesses. The crucifixes that people put around their necks, hang in their houses, crosses that they hang in their houses. We were told as Isolele not to do that. We shouldn't do that. We're even told, do not adore anything that your eye beholds. So that's what you see, or even that you imagine. So you have an idea of something and you're being told, do not even worship what you're imagining. Okay? The only entity we're to worship is your God, you as Isolele, And your God is the one who brought you out of Egypt. And he tells us he's a jealous God. Now, just think about it. If you were to think about somebody you love, whether it's your parent or your spouse, and you replace the Lord thy God here with that person, and it, for example, might say, you shall love your mother with all your heart, with all your might, with all your strength. You shall adore her and serve her and obey her. You shall have no other mother before yourself. You shall not make unto yourself an image or likeness of anything. It's just the same way we have relationships with loved ones. But then now we're talking about the greatest commandment, which is our relationship with the Most High. He that created us, created our environment that we live in. He is saying, I don't expect you and I don't want you. I'm demanding that you do not go and give your affection to somebody else, because that other entity, no other entity can get the credit for creating you, for creating your environment. So because of that, he's a jealous God. He will not allow you to do that. These are the terms of this relationship. Okay. And those that hate him, he's gonna deal with their children from generation to generation. Okay, so they might encounter multi-generational problems, and they might not even understand why they're going through what they're going through. It's because they do not love the Most High, Tatanzambi. But what happens to those that keep his commandments? He shows them a multitude of mercies. A multitude of mercies. So here the Most High is telling us, this is how you're supposed to love me. Do these things and don't do these things that I have listed here. He gives us the do's and the don'ts of our relationship. And he gives us the consequences if we do or if we do not follow his greatest commandment. I will summarize by playing for you again this commandment, and you can just meditate upon it, and then we'll get into some discussion.
Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy might, and with all thy strength. Thou shalt adore him, and serve him, and obey him. Thou shalt have no other gods before thee. Thou shalt not make unto thee any image or likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the waters of the earth, to bow thyself unto it, or to worship it. Thou shalt not bow down thyself unto, nor adore anything that thine eye beholdeth, or thy imagination conceiveth of, but the Lord thy God only. For the Lord thy God is a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, from generation to generation, even upon all that hate him, and showing a multitude of mercies unto them that keep his commandments